Good evening. My name's Kirsty and I'm one of the librarians at Wyndham City Council. I'd like to begin tonight by acknowledging the Wadawurrung, Woiwurrung and Boonwurrung peoples of the Kulin Nation as the traditional custodians on the lands on which Wyndham is being built. On behalf of our guest, I'd also like to acknowledge the Whadjuk people as the traditional custodians of the lands they are joining us from. Please, we pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Tonight, we are joined by Rachael Johns, the best-selling author of The Patterson Girls and a number of other romance and women's fiction books, including The Art of Keeping Secrets, The Greatest Gift, and Lost Without You. Her latest release, Outback Secrets, is the fifth book in the popular Bunyip Bay series. I'm excited to hear what she has to say, and we'll leave you now in her capable hands.
Thank you so much. My screen's gone differently. Hello, it's so wonderful to see so many names, and some of them are very familiar, so thank you for coming to listen to me tonight, and thank you Kirsty and Anita and everyone at Wyndham Libraries for inviting me to come and chat about my latest book, Outback Secrets, also my writing process, rural romance in general, whatever you, sorry, I'm just reading the chat, whatever you would like me to talk about, feel free to put things in the chat as I go along if you have any questions, but we'll also have, Kirsty said, a session at the end of Q&A where you can ask any other questions. So when I usually do an event in a library in person, I often start talking about my writing journey and where I came from, but these days I think a lot of people have already either followed me online or they've been to a talk before. I have done in Victoria a few years ago. So I thought instead of talking about how I got started in writing, which is quite a long story, has funny elements, but it takes a little time, I'd focus more tonight on rural romance and why I write rural romance, how I got started in rural romance, and of course, leading into my latest book, Outback Secrets, which is, because I'm terrible at maths, the fifth book in my Bunyip Bay trilogy. Yeah, we might talk about that and how that happened. Sorry, if I glance down, it's because I'm just checking the comments and because my image is down there, and it feels so weird just talking to a screen without being able to see myself or anyone. So apologies if I'm not looking directly at you all. I'm trying. So I had been writing, I think, just maths here, for about 10 years before I decided that I was going to try my hand at rural romance. So I'm guessing if you're here tonight, many of you have either read my books or you've read a rural romance novel before. If not, you probably understand it's a pretty self-explanatory term, rural romance. So rural romance are novels that are set in small rural communities, and they've got strong romantic elements. The romance is often the focus of these stories. I'll jump around a bit probably, but I think there's a spectrum of the rural romance. Well, there's a spectrum of rural romance. At one end, you have people who write quite a lot about the issues that are going on in country towns, the farms, environmental sort of side of things. And then at the other end, you've got books that are quite heavily romance, and, you know, not a huge amount of farming type stuff going on. I think all of us rural romance authors, and there's a lot now, fall somewhere on the spectrum. And for me, I like the community of small towns. I do have farming elements in my books too, and often there's a hero or heroine who is a farmer. But to me, the most important thing about my books is the relationships. So in the romances, the novels, there's obviously the relationship between the main two characters, but I also really love the relationships of the people in the town and the communities, and so I'll talk a little bit about why. So what happened is about, as I said, 10 years after I decided I was going to write a book, and I decided I was going to write a book very early. I was only 17 or 18. I just had my heart broken, and I kind of turned to writing through therapy. But as I said, I'm not going to bore you with that whole long story. And then I did a writing degree at university. At uni, they wanted you to write the Booker Prize winner or Pulitzer Prize. Basically, they wanted you to write serious literary fiction or poetry. poetry was fine. Unfortunately, I don't have a poetic bone in my body, and the books that I was reading at the time were books like Bridget Jones' Diary, books by people like Marianne Keyes, Kathy Kelly. Don't know if Monica McInerney was published at that stage yet, but it was those type of books that we called at that stage chick lit. I loved them. Unfortunately, I didn't get very far in trying to write in my degree. I almost actually failed my uni degree because I got a 3 out of 10 in my honours one project, and they basically said to me, you know, I don't think this is for you. Oh, Megan says we have met back in WA. I loved reading the Bunyip Bay series. Oh, Megan, are you from Tasmania? Sorry, I get distracted. If so, I know who you are. Anyway, after a number of years of kind of not getting anywhere with my supposedly more serious writing, so I was aiming to write literary fiction when what I really liked reading was contemporary commercial chick lit, and so I think I was doing or trying to do what I call a weird combination of literary chick lit, which isn't actually a thing. And so I'd submit these books. Granted, also I didn't submit many, and also uni taught me nothing about writing a novel. It was very much a lot more airy-fairy. And then, so I wasn't getting very far. And about 3 or 4 years after finishing uni, I met with a friend from school, and not school, from uni. And we were both lamenting the fact that, oh, it's so depressing, we're never going to get anywhere in our writing. And then one of us thought about an article we happened to read in a paper while we were at uni. And it was about Mills and Boon books and how you can make an absolute packet writing for Mills and Boon. And we thought, stuff this, why are we trying to write serious literary fiction? Why are we trying to win the Booker Prize? We'll just write a romance novel. How hard can it be? So although I was reading sort of chick lit, I'd never read a straight romance novel. And by that, I don't mean like a male-female romance novel. I mean, I'd never sort of read a book that was marketed as romance, and I'd certainly never read a Mills and Boon. I had that sort of idea that Mills and Boon are all heaving bosoms and throbbing manhoods and all that kind of stuff. And I don't know where this came from. So many people like myself who've never read a Mills and Boon think badly of them. And I absolutely hate that now, because I decided then and there that I was going to devote myself to learning the craft. And I read 50 Mills and Boons in a month. Luckily, I was working at our local library, so that was easy. They're short books. I was pregnant with my second child at this stage. And I found when I was reading them that I actually really liked them. Some, it was like any book you read, you know, some I was like, oh yeah, whatever. Others I really enjoyed, but they weren't at all what I imagined from my sort of, I don't know, just the view that sort of people seem to get. Anyway, then I decided to Google how to write a romance novel. I always say that's one of the other reasons I took so long. It took me 15 years to get published. And one of the reasons is I was aiming the wrong direction. Another one is that I couldn't just Google how to write a romance or how to write a novel, because when I first started writing, Google was just a baby. But in 2006, when I decided I was going to write a romance novel, I Googled how to write a romance novel, and it came up with a wonderful organisation called the Romance Writers of Australia, which I became a member of. And suddenly I started to be taught things that I should have learnt at university. Things that characters need to have a past. They need to have things that have shaped them into who they are, often wounds or bad things that have happened to them, that there needs to be a goal that they're working towards in the book, that there needs to be conflict, obstacles thrown in their way, a whole load of things. And it was just like a big, huge, massive eye-opener for me. So I'm just going to read Kirsty's comment. I remember learning about the strict guidelines for Mills and Boons. For any aspiring writers, here they are. Oh, that's great. So Mills and Boon does have rather strict guidelines, but not probably as strict as sort of people think if they haven't ever attempted to read or write one. However, saying that, I aimed for there's a number of different lines. There's sweet, there's sexy. They're called different things in various places around the world. There's historical, there's medical, there's suspense, there's so many different types. And I sort of spent a number of years writing really hard, learning my craft through Romance Writers of Australia, and I see the link's been put in there as well. And if anyone here is an aspiring writer, I honestly cannot recommend enough that you have a look at that organisation. It was the difference between me getting published in the end and sort of floundering around for probably another 10, 15 years. Anyway, I got really close with Mills and Boon. and I wrote a number of, manuscripts for them. But Kirsty mentioned the strict guidelines. If you click on that link, you'll find there's a number, as I said, different imprints. And I kept falling between the sweet and the sexy lines. And they're not called that if you click those lines, but that was back at what they were called then. So my manuscripts were there were too sort of sassy and young and a bit and sexy for the sweet line. But the real sexy line, it's called Presents Overseas. And I think, what do we call it here now? I can't even remember. Might just be sexy here. It's got all these, basically it's an alpha hero line. So you have Greek billionaires and sheiks and, princesses and all this type of stuff. And it was just, for me, it wasn't where my love of romance was, because I'd fallen in love with reading books, as I said, like Kathy Kelly, Bridget Jones. And then through the Romance Writers Organisation, I'd started reading a lot of contemporary romance novels, but they were very much, yes, realistic novels, the type of people you might meet in real life. And I loved reading those sorts of stories. So I wanted to write something like that. But I kept falling between the lines. And after a number of rejections, I was almost ready to give up writing for Mills and Boon, or trying to write for Mills and Boon. And they were good rejections, because in the writing world, you kind of get, when you start submitting books, you can get 2 types of rejections, or maybe 3. The third is not exactly a rejection. So the first one you get is called a form rejection, and that's basically just saying, thank you for submitting your book. It doesn't fit our line. We wish you the best. And, they may have read a couple of pages, they may have read a couple of paragraphs, but for some reason they've decided that, you haven't got what it takes for them to work with you. Another rejection is a little bit more detail. And if you get one of those rejections, it's a good sign, because most authors take numerous attempts to write a book. And most authors I know, published authors now, we have enough rejections when they were sent, now they're emailed, but we have enough rejections that if we printed them out, we could line the walls of our house. So rejections are kind of like a rite of passage thing, but you hope that they sort of get better and better. So a good rejection might tell you, we love this story, but we don't think your characters are quite developed, or this was not consistent. We need you to work on the pacing or the tension. Anyway, so I started getting better rejections like that. But then after a few years and my final rejection, my book went to acquisitions at Mills and Boon, which means they considered buying one of them, and then they rejected me there. So that's like that was sort of the furthest you can go without getting sold. And I just thought, I've wasted almost 12 years, I think, by this time, writing. I had 3 little kids. I was married. I would be writing my novels or trying to write a novel in every available opportunity. So when the kids would sleep together, like at the same time, which was something tough to wrangle when you have 3 little kids, I would write. At night when my husband was watching TV, I would write. I would bribe him, not really, but he'd take the kids out on the weekend. I would write. By this stage, we were living in a small town called Kojonup in Western Australia. If anyone's read Jilted, my first rural romance, it's kind of based loosely on Kojonup. I'll write myself a note, talk about the towns where each of my books are based and how I decide on that and why they're fictional. But we were living in Kojonup. My husband was a supermarket manager. I was a stay-at-home mum at this stage. And rural romance suddenly became a thing. Many of you, I'm sure, have read Rachael Treasure's book, or all her books, but the first one was Jillaroo. And it was a huge hit in Australia. And Australian publishers suddenly realised, hey, good question, Megan, I'll get to that. Australian publishers suddenly realised, hey, you know what? People like reading about Australian settings. They like reading about country towns. And more to the point, they like reading about romance. Previously, before Rachael Treasure, we'd had quite a small amount of published Australian authors. We had Colleen McCulloch, who, of course, Thornbirds is rural romance in a way. We had Bryce Courtney, Tim Winton, we had Judy Nunn, Di Morrissey. But Rachael Treasure did something that made them realise that romance kind of was something to pay attention to. And so publishers started picking up more rural romance authors. And I had a couple of friends who were writing in this genre, Fiona Palmer and Catherine Hine, and they'd only just got their first book sold. And when I was getting my final rejection from Mills and Boon and thinking, you know what, I should give up. I I'm wasting my time. I should be doing something more interesting, or not more interesting. I should be doing something more worthwhile, where I might actually, spending time with my family or making money, whatever. They said to me, don't give up. Don't just stop writing for Mills and Boon. They said, you live in a small rural community. Kojonup is about 2,000 people. It's 300 kilometres south of Perth. It's mostly sheep and crop farming. There's also a lot of polo cross happens down there. It's quite a wealthy farming area. Anyway, so I was living in this small town, and by this stage I'd probably been there around 3 years. And I call myself now a converted country girl. I've spent a quarter of my life living in small towns, but until my early 20s, I'd only ever lived in the city. But I fell in love with living in small towns. I noticed a lot of, I'm sure some of you here probably lived in small towns before, or do live in small towns. And I learnt a lot of things fast. They were not what I imagined. They were quite cliquey, and I think towns are different depending on where you are, but Kojonup to me, when I first got there, felt quite cliquey, and I felt very much like an outsider for the first probably 6 months to a year. I cried frequently. I also had a 3-month-old baby to a year-old baby, so and he didn't sleep, so there's other things going on. But after a number of years, I fell in love with Kojonup, and I learned that everyone in small towns knows everything about everybody else. Sometimes it's a good thing, sometimes not so much. I'll give you one example. When I was only been there a couple of weeks, I think, and we lived on a house on the corner of one of the main roads, and my husband was the supermarket manager. And I went out to the bin one day, about 12 o'clock, I think it was, in the middle of the day. It was out on the road, so I went to put something out on the road. I had a 3-month-old baby. I was still in my pajamas. Hey, I had nothing to go. Nowhere to go. I knew no one, and I had a tiny baby. So I went out to the road in my pajamas, and about 10 minutes later, my husband rings me. And he says, why are you still in your pajamas? And I said, what? How do you know? And he said, someone came down the road and it's into the shop, and they said to me, oh, I like your wife's pink pajamas. So that was one of the first times I realised that, you can't do anything in small towns without people finding out. I had so many experiences of, I guess, being a fish out of water. I went to a 2-year-old's birthday party that was 30 kilometres south, and I couldn't open the farm gate, so we couldn't go to the party. We had to leave the present in the RMB box on the side of the road, and then we drove all the way back home. My poor kid was a bit disgusted by that. And then while we were living in Kojonup, I experienced, or the town experienced, a number of highs and a number of lows. And one of the lows was actually inspired one of my books, Outback Blaze. And one of the lows was my husband, the shop where he was the supermarket manager, it was a co-op, and it had been the hub of the local community since 1952, I think. Some people had been working there since they left school and they were nearing retirement age. It was a place where you went to buy milk and you ended up staying for, a couple of hours because, you'd meet so many people and you'd be having conversations with everyone. It had a news agency, it had a liquor store, it had hardware, it had the supermarket part where my husband was, and a drapery which sold toys, clothes, everything under the sun. One night I was in bed and I was writing, I'm sorry I'm going all over the place. I'm going to get to why I started rural romance in a second. But one night I was in bed, and by this stage I decided that I was giving myself one last ditch attempt at writing a novel. So I was writing Jilted. I'll tell you why I wrote that in a sec. And I had a third baby by this stage, and all the kids were asleep. It was about 7:30 at night, but it was February, so it was still sort of, warm night and still kind of right. And I was sitting in bed and my laptop, and I suddenly said to my husband, I think my laptop's on fire. And he said, don't be ridiculous, woman. And he's looking at me thinking I'm crazy. And I can't smell anything. And so I said, okay, right. He goes, just go back to your typing. So I did, went back to my typing. And then he's like, no, I was like, hang on, no, I can definitely smell smoke. And he said, oh, well, let's go check the kids' room, because we had, our air conditioner was broken. We had an old fan going in the kids' room. And so suddenly we were like, oh, what if it's that? So we went in there. Nope, it's fine. He's like, oh my gosh, you're dreaming, you're imagining things. Anyway, we walked back through the house, and there was an open window at the front, and suddenly he smelled smoke. The moment he smelled the smoke, it was like, oh my gosh, you're right, something's on fire. Anyway, 2 seconds later, his phone rings, and it was the security company that ran, looked after the security at the co-op where he was supermarket manager, and it was indeed telling them that the supermarket part of the co-op was on fire. He ran down the road, he drove down the road. Luckily, my mum was living next door at the time, so I ran next door and said to her, "Quick, come and look after my kids." And then I ran down the road in my slippers and my pajamas. And I was not the only one there in slippers and pajamas. Everyone had come out, all the people that lived in town. And we were standing there on the side of the road watching the hub of the community go up in smoke. And I remember thinking, oh my goodness, this is absolutely terrible. This is such a big part of this community. It's where my husband has a job. I don't have a job. What are we going to do? But I also remember that image of everyone coming together. The local volunteer firefighters were in there doing their bit. Everyone was watching and praying and hoping for the best. And I remember thinking, this is so going in a book one day. And it took me a little bit longer. But anyway, so there's just a few experiences of country towns. I became a member of playgroup. I was on the playgroup committee. I was on the toy library committee. I got very much involved in the town and loved it. And then we moved to Goomalling in the wheat belt, Western Australia, and bought our own supermarket. And we were there for 5 years, and I very much loved it too. So when I was sort of deciding I should give up writing after my last Mills and Boon rejection, friends of mine said, you know what, you should write a rural romance because you live in a small rural community. And I was like, oh, I don't know. I feel like a bit of a fraud because I was a teacher, not working at the time. I don't think I was working in the library, as I said. And I was married to a supermarket manager. I had no farming background whatsoever. My husband actually does. His family lived in Southern Cross, and his dad was also a farm manager that moved around a lot. But I felt like a complete fraud. But then I thought about it and I thought, you know what? I love reading rural romance. I love stories that are set in the country, and I love romance. So I'm going to give it one last stitch attempt. And I decided instead of focusing on the farm, I would focus on the small community and the people that are in these towns and, the relationships they have. The fact that knowing everything about everyone else is sometimes a good thing and sometimes it's a bad thing. And sometimes it's gossip and not true, but that gives you so much fodder for fiction. So I gave myself a last-ditch attempt. I said, if this doesn't work, I'm giving up. I'm taking up quilting. I'm going back to work. I'm going to give up writing. And I'm not joking about quilting. I still want to start quilting one day because I used to love sewing and handwork and handcrafts and stuff like that. Oh my gosh, there's lots of questions, so I'm going to keep going in a second. I hope you're accepting. Oh, that's Megan. Yeah, it is. I think I'm just going to read what you said. It does feel, you can really very much feel like an outsider when you first join a small community. And I know plenty of people who came and went and spent a couple of years in both the towns I've lived in, and they never felt like it was home. And it's really hard to do that. I think it takes a long time. And, even if you put yourself out there, I was going to say you have to put yourself out there, but even if you do, it's sometimes what would happen to me is I just sort of start getting really connected to someone and then they'd move away or they'd go back to Perth or something. So, it takes a long time. I think it was easier for us in my second town, Goomalling, because we owned a business. So we were the hub of the community. Everyone would come in and do their, shopping and all that kind of stuff. And they'd talk to us. And so straight away we were known, but it is hard. But I also think that's why it works in fiction, because often in rural fiction, you've either got people coming back into a town when they've left, and they've left for some sort of, quite tragic or serious emotional reason. And so, they bring back, they're returning to the town, they're in conflict about that. Or you've got someone who's there and has never lived there before, and they can really experience that sort of feeling of being an outsider or a fish out of water. Is that the thing I mean? Anyway, I'm probably going off on a tangent. So I decided, I'm going to write about rural romance. I'm going to write a rural romance because that's what I love living. And that was the book that got me, published. I always wonder if I actually would have given up if that one was rejected. That was Jilted, as I said. And I often say now to aspiring authors who come up to me and they say, oh, I think I'm going to give up writing because I've had a number of rejections, and I don't know if I can keep going. Because it's hard, when you keep getting those rejections and you're putting all this hard work in. And I always say, do. I think they want me to say, no, don't give up, you can do it. And instead I say, yeah, give up. Because it's not the easiest career. You've got to do it because you love it. Most of us aren't like J.K. Rowling. And And so, yeah, it's not the easiest career in the world, and yet it's very rewarding if you do it because you love story. And, you know, I've built a wonderful community online as well, and of readers who support me and encourage me as I write. And that is one of the reasons why Outback Secrets exists. So anyway, that's why I love rural romance. That's why I write it. I just think there's so much room for drama and fun, and I do love the romance elements. I also write women's fiction, and sometimes they don't have as strong romantic elements, but I do. My favourite women's fiction books that I've written are the ones that do have a bit of romance in them. I think romance can always add to a book. I'm just going to answer Chrissy's question before I quickly go on and talk a bit about Outback Secrets. Okay, how long did it take to write Outback Secrets? That is an interesting question, because usually people usually would say, how long does it take you to write a book? I used to be very, very fast because I had little kids while I was writing, and I was doing other jobs as well, and I could write a book in 2 or 3 months. I think that's when I first sort of was published, and I think then it was because there's a number of reasons. I didn't have a lot of voices in my head, which I do have now. I've got wonderful voices. I've got voices from my readers who are saying they're so excited about, you know, reading another book from me, which is great, but it's also, I don't want to let people down. And I've got voices from editors who are telling me, you know, what I've done wrong in the past, and so I'm aware of that as I'm writing. I've got voices from book reviews in my head. That not all authors read book reviews. I'm a sucker for punishment, so I often do. And so I've got the voices of someone who said something, you know, these characters, you know, are not realistic or something like that. And I've got that in my head, and I'm worried about that. The other thing is, when I first started writing books, most of us weren't very much on social media. I think Facebook was around when I first got published. Instagram wasn't, Goodreads wasn't, TikTok definitely was not. All the things we have to do now, we don't have to, but we're encouraged to do as authors. That wasn't a thing. So we didn't have to spend time on social media. And I enjoy it, but the fact that you enjoy it doesn't mean that it doesn't take away from time you could be writing. So it used to be a lot quicker. Now I'd say it's probably 4 to 5 months for a first draft. I mean, I'm not necessarily writing that whole time, because I have written 2 books a year for the past couple of years again. So, you know, I have to stop off in a first draft to edit another book that's coming out next. I'm doing promotion. So like at the moment, I'm writing a book called The Work Wives, and I'm nearing the end of that, but I'm also in the promotion phase of Outback Secrets. So I'm doing a number of events like this. I'm going out to bookshops where I can and signing books, and I'm writing blogs. So, you know, it's not just a complete flow always of writing a first draft. You get interrupted. But this one was a little bit different, because I started writing Outback Secrets, I think about August last year, and it was due on December 1st. Yeah, I would have said, so I should have August, September, October, November, 4 months. I thought that was great. And I always knew it was going to be Liam, the publican. So I'm probably going around. I should have told you a little about this book. So Kirsty, I'm going to get back to, sorry, not Kirsty, Megan, I'm going to get back to the rest of your question in a second. But I'm just going to give you a brief intro of Outback Secrets, so that then what I'm about to say makes sense. So I wrote Outback Secrets, as I said, which was the 5th in a trilogy. This is my trilogy of my Bunyip Bay books. So we have Outback Dreams. They're all getting rejacketed at the moment, so they got slightly different covers if you look online. Outback Blaze, which was inspired by that fire I told you about in Kojonup. Outback Ghost, and that was the trilogy. There's a loose thread of a mystery running through all 3 of those books. It's slightly introduced in the first, a little bit more in the second, and it's solved in the third, but you can read them standalone. And then we had Outback Sisters. Now, I wrote Outback Sisters a couple of years after writing Outback Ghost, because I had so many wonderful readers saying to me how much they'd fallen in love with Bunyip Bay and that they wanted more. And I never planned on writing more. I'm not a planner in my books. As like each book, I write quite organically, and so I don't write an outline or anything before I start. And I very loosely had an idea of what was happening in those 3 books, but I definitely never planned for more. However, luckily I had some characters in the earlier books, 2 sisters who I'd introduced, Frankie and Simone. Frankie owns a cafe, Simone's her sister, and she's a single mum to teenage daughters. And so when a lot of people started asking me for more, I suddenly started thinking about who was left in Bunyip Bay, and it was Frankie and Simone. And so I came up with a story for them, and I wrote that. And I had so much fun writing this book. This book is, all my books have one romance in. This book is 2 for the price of 1. So you get double the fun because it's sisters falling in love with brothers, but it's not smooth, and there's a little bit of confusion over who's supposed to be with who. It was a hoot to write. So that was that one. And I thought that was definitely it. But still, I kept getting messages from people. Every time I did an event like this, people would say, are you going to write more Bunyip Bay? I'll tell you soon where Bunyip Bay is based on. But so I started thinking about maybe doing another Bunyip Bay. And I looked back at the books and I thought, there's one person I have mentioned in every single book. Luckily, I hadn't said much about him. So, you know, I could create him to be kind of how I wanted him to be as I thought more about it. And that is Liam the publican. Now, I am fascinated by country pubs. I've written another book, Mandurah, set in a country pub. I love the old buildings. I've driven a lot of, you know, I've lived in 2 small towns, which means I've driven a lot between other small towns. And the old pubs I always sort of smile at them. They're often beautiful old buildings. Mostly, a lot of the time these days, they're a bit derelict, and, you know, they need some serious TLC. But I think, you know, they were the hub of communities and the social hub of communities so long ago. They're not always now. And I always, you know, I just love them. So the other thing is I was thinking about the idea that publicans, bartenders and hairdressers, they know everything about everybody else. So I thought that it would be quite fun to write a story about Liam. Instead of, you know, him being sort of a periphery character in all the other books, we could finally find out who he is. And I think this next stage, so I knew I was going to write a book about him. I also wanted to write a Christmas book because, you know, there's a lot of Christmas is a very popular thing these days in novels, but there's not a huge amount of Australian set Christmas novels. So I thought I'd write a Christmas novel. So I had those 2 things. Anita and Kirst, you just let me know. I think, have I got another 5 minutes before questions? Anyway, so I had those 2 things, Christmas and Liam. And then I had to come up with, you know, a plot. And of course, because it's a romance, a love interest. So I started with title. Often in my books, especially in this series, the title kind of tells me quite a lot about what the books are about. Often in publishing or as an author, you have to not be wed to your title. Often you submit a book under one title and the publisher will decide it should be a different title for some reason. And when I was writing Outback Dreams, Outback Blaze and Outback Ghost, I didn't think they would be the finished titles. I just wanted a sort of an idea in my head, because the thing is, Bunyip Bay is not actually very outback, so I feel a bit of a fraud. It's coastal, but it has got farming land. But so I did these titles, Outback Dreams, Outback Blaze and Outback Ghost, because for me that encapsulated what each book was about. The first one is about dreams, the second one's predominantly about a fire, and the third one is about a ghost. Sisters tells you again about their relationship as well as the romance. So I thought I need a title, and so I opened it up to my Facebook page. I asked lots of people, you know, what's another title in the Outback series you would like to read? And the best one was definitely Outback Secrets, and I thought that worked really well with the publican. Sorry, I'm just writing a message to Kirsty and Megan. How long do I have left? Because I should know, but I'm just checking. So I thought, yeah, I like publicans. Publicans know everyone's secrets. So after the title, the next line came into my head, which was, Liam the publican knows the secrets of everyone in Bunyip Bay, but no one knows his secret. And that was fantastic. Okay, and put questions down if you want any more. And Megan, I'm going to finish your question in a second. So that was, I thought, I love that line. Liam the publican knows the secrets of everyone in Bunyip Bay, but no one knows his secrets. The only problem is I had no idea what his secret was either. So while I was, you know, working on that, and I'm not going to tell you what it is because that's a huge spoiler, I thought, okay, now I need a heroine for him. And I have always loved kind of either friends to lovers stories or second chance romance, or what we possibly would call the one that got away. So I decided that I was going to have Liam, someone he used to be in love with a long time ago, but they didn't know, his friend's his best friend's wife turn up because his best friend died in the year, and she was going to turn up for Christmas because she couldn't cope being with, you know, her family and everyone for Christmas who was mourning him, and she decided to come to the pub. And I love this concept, and I wrote 30,000 words, and I just thought, it's not working. I just could not get them. They were friends, and there's no way I could get them to overstep that boundary. So I was stressing big time. And I remember one day I had a nap instead of writing my words. And I always say that when I'm stuck, there's about 3 things I can do. And that is, I can go for a walk. Often you get the best ideas while you're going for a walk. I can have a shower, or I can have a nap, because being tired sort of sometimes, if you have a nap, it refreshes you and you know what to do. Anyway, so I had a nap hoping that I would work out how I was going to get these 2 friends to cross the line and become more than friends. But I woke up and I thought, you know what? It's not going to happen. I need to start again. And this was probably about mid-September by now. Books due December. I was really stressed. I started feeling physically ill at the thought of writing it. But I thought, back to the drawing board. So then I came up with a different heroine. I had to keep Liam because he's the one that the publishers, you know, thought I was writing about, but they didn't have any idea about the heroine. And so I realized also that the first book, although they had the background past, there wasn't any really serious sort of issue in that book. And all of these books, in fact, all of my romance novels and all my normal novels, normal, you know what I mean, do have serious issues in them. Outback Dreams, Monty the hero, wrong one. Monty the hero is dealing with his brother's autism, and there's also what's the word? Oh my gosh, I can't think of the word. Outback Blaze, we're dealing with domestic violence. There's a serious illness in there. It's not that they're fun and easy to read too. Outback Ghost, there's a little girl with Down syndrome, also dealing with agoraphobia and a missing person. There's issues in Sisters. All these books mean something to me because I'm exploring an issue that's important. And I realized that the book that I was trying to write didn't really have anything about that. So I decided to write a book with a heroine who came back to town because her brother had serious mental health issues. And she was she became the librarian. I loved her so much, and I'm not going to tell you too much about that story because I might use her side of it one day. But she just wasn't. I think she was right for Liam, but I would have had to be a 500,000 word book because it just wasn't working the way it was. Also, I think I had a niggle in my sort of self that I had 2 characters here that weren't really rural, because I had a hero who owned the pub and I had a heroine who did have farming background and family, but she was the librarian. So again, I started feeling this really sick feeling in my gut that it wasn't going to work. I'd written 35,000 words. So by this stage, I'd written 65,000 words. So Megan, I'm getting to your answer. And that had taken me, you know, a good 3 months, I think. And again, I suddenly realized it's not working. I'm going to have to start again. This is the only book that this has ever happened to me. And it's a fear that happens with every book I write. And I know a number of authors that are brave to start again. Kirsty said, I'm glad you keep, yeah. Well, I also want to write a book that I'm proud of, and I just don't think I could have been proud of those books because for various reasons. My writing friends were saying to me, you're crazy, Rach. You've got everything you need. You've got your characters, you've got conflict, you know, you've got a trope. Just keep going. It's you. It's not the book. And they may have been right, but I couldn't. So then I had a month to go. I asked for an extension. And I decided to sort of go back to basics. So I chose a rural heroine. So the heroine in Outback Secrets is not someone who has appeared in the other books. Her name is Henrietta Forward, but she prefers to be called Henry. If you want any questions, post them now, okay? Her name is Henry, and she is an agricultural pilot, and she's a really feisty heroine who basically doesn't live anywhere apart from out of her van. She's got a combi van called Cecil, and she drives around the country in her combi van, and she also sometimes flies overseas for work. I did a lot of research into agricultural flying, and you know, it's a male-dominated career, so she's got to have a certain personality. And so Henry is not the type of person who wants to settle down. She doesn't want to have children. So she's not, in a lot of ways, she's not your typical romance heroine. And she comes home for Christmas. She's supposed to come home for Christmas, but she comes home a little bit earlier because there's an incident that happens when she's at work that kind of puts her off she loses her confidence for a while. And this is her big issue in the book, because flying is her life. It's everything for her. And if she can't fly, she doesn't know who she is. So Liam helps her work through those stuff. But it's interesting that we've got a lovely person watching tonight called Bree, who is the admin in my online book club, which is Rachael John's online book club on Facebook. And Bree is a really good friend of mine. We've become friends over the years since she reviewed my first book. She's still, I think, honest when she reviews my books. But anyway, I said to Bree, who reads a lot of romance, I said, what's your favourite romance trope? Because I need to start again and I need to go back to basics. I've got a rural heroine now. I've got Liam. I need a story. And she said her favourite romance sort of trope that she likes to read is fake relationships. So I said, that's it. That's what I'm doing. And I decided then and there that I was going to write this book whether it killed me or not. If it did kill me, or if I couldn't finish, then that was it for me. I wasn't going to write another book again. It took me another 2 months, so I missed my deadline, but my publishers were fantastic about that, and I wrote it reasonably fast. So I think the final version of this one I wrote in 2 months, Megan, but it did require quite a lot of rewriting, because I had to, I think usually before I start writing a novel, I think a lot about the characters. I spend a lot of time daydreaming while I'm usually doing other books and stuff. I'm thinking ahead about the next book. And so I'm getting to know the characters. Bree's like, and it was that easy. We wish. Oh, and Anita's put the reference to my online book club in there if anyone wants to join who's not already a member. So yeah, I think a lot about my characters beforehand, and I know them quite well. And I think I didn't have enough time to let this story percolate. So although I don't, do a big outline before I start writing, and I'm a more organic writer, and sort of let the story, it sounds woo-woo, but I let the characters tell the story to me as we go. Doesn't always, that doesn't mean it goes easily, because sometimes they won't speak to me and I go a wrong direction, or I'm trying to make them do something that they wouldn't do. But like, I needed more time, I think, to percolate this story. So in the end, what happened is I had very big rewrites, but finally I'm proud of this book. My publisher and editor, I think, and I've been so overwhelmed by the feedback I've had. I think it's so far my best rated book on Goodreads and Amazon, which after such a struggle to write it is just amazing. And I think it has helped, me with my writing confidence a little bit, in that I know it's hard, writing a book is hard. But I'm sort of slowly, after over 10 years of being published, I'm realizing that it's okay that it's hard, and that it might take, a while to get the right place. But if I put the work in, eventually, with the help of my publisher and my editors, and, me digging deep with characters and wanting to write the best book I can, eventually I think I can get there. So yeah, that is how long it took me to write Secrets. And what else do you need to know about Secrets? Well, as I said, it is a standalone novel, or did I say that? But it is. Even though it's set in the town of Bunyip Bay, a lot of new readers who have found me in the last couple of years are wondering, can they read Bunyip, or can they read Outback Secrets without reading the other books? And the answer is yes, I think. I've had a number of reviewers do this. But because I wrote the book, hopefully so that, there's references to other there's references to other people from the previous books, but that's sort of just for the readers who have read it, so they can kind of, go, oh, that's what so-and-so is doing now. One of the reasons I think people wanted me to continue the series was because in Outback Sisters, the couple from Outback Dreams are pregnant, and of course they don't have the baby. So people were like, well, what did Faith and Monty have? And so I made sure that, I put things like that in the book so that you kind of had an update on what was happening. But there's no reason why you need to have read the other books to read this one. And so, yeah, it's set in Bunyip Bay, which is a fictional town. I write all my rural romances are fictional towns, but they're based very strongly in a particular area. So Bunyip Bay is, I'll get to your question in a minute. Is it Mariana? Beautiful name. So yeah, all of my books are based in a fictional town, because I don't want to, get something wrong. Small towns as I said, you know, you can write about a city and things can be more vague, but in a small town, if you say there's 3 pubs because you need 3 pubs for the plot, but there's actually only 2, or if you say so-and-so owns a supermarket and they're like, no, this people own the supermarket. So, or there's only 4 cops in the town and you want them to be 5, you know, things like that. You don't have to get the exact town right, but I like basing it on a real place. So I have a very sort of a vague idea of tone and vibe and what the setting is like, you know, what the temperature will be like, what animals might be there, all those sorts of things. And I also always ground it by referencing nearby towns so you can kind of guess where it is. So Outback Secrets is based on Dongara in Western Australia. I remember when I first went there, I was looking for a town for Outback Dreams. I didn't realise that was going to be the place. We went there because my family, my husband has family up there. I'd never been there before. And I was like, it sounds awful, Dongara. I didn't know what to expect, but it was not this beautiful coastal community that I fell in love with. And the thing about Dongara, Geraldton area is, yeah, it does have the coast all on one side, but it's also very close to, you know, farming land. And that is exactly what I wanted. I am going to tell you one more thing about future characters or future books, because that's often a question. But I'm first going to answer Mariana's question. If anyone else has another question, I think we're nearing the end of time, so please ask now, because I'm happy to, you know, I'm an open book. I'm happy to talk about what I'm reading lately or how I write, whatever, or this series. So it should be available in shops now, Mariana, but I know I'm hoping I'm saying your name right. I know there's been huge delays in distribution right across the country and right across publishers because of COVID. I know we blame COVID for everything, but it's just, this is the case in this way because they're behind on so many deliveries and things like that. It's just they're overwhelmed. My book only got to New Zealand this week and it was supposed to be out 2 weeks ago. So some shops also have sold out. Hopefully they'll be restocking. Most places like Big W's and stuff have them, but as Kirsty said, it's now in the library and we've got copies, or they've got copies. And I just want to say something that I don't know if people know about libraries. So authors make their money in a few different ways. And as I said, when most of us aren't J.K. Rowling, I do this to pay my bills. And, you know, I make a reasonable living most of the time, but it's not, we're not millionaires, and I need my work, you know, to provide my income. So the way we get money is through royalties from the sale of our books. But we also, good question, Anita, we also get money when we do events sometimes, or festivals, or do workshops. You know, you get a payment for that, for your time. But one thing a lot of people don't know is that we also get a payment called public lending rights through public libraries. So it's not every time a book is taken out of the library, it's worked out on how many of a certain book are in the public library system. And once a year we get a payment for that. So if you can't afford to buy a book and you want to support authors, the best thing to do is to go along to your local library. So yeah, thanks for that reminder, Kirsty. Anita said, I've been admiring your bookshelves and wondering whether you read a lot of romance or do you have some other favourite genres? Great question. I read pretty much everything and I read a lot. I'm a slow reader, which annoys me, but this year, I decided to set myself the challenge of reading 45 books on Goodreads. Previously, I haven't actually kept track of, you know, how many. And I'm now at 79, I think. So I've read 79 books. Some of them have been audiobooks. I find audiobooks are great for when I'm listening. When I'm cleaning or running or driving. It makes me, you know, not hate cleaning so much if I'm listening to an audiobook. But so my favourite genre is definitely the women's fiction and contemporary romance. I don't read a huge amount of rural romance now because there's so much out there, and also I find it hard to, you know, there's only so many stories and I don't want to sort of be influenced. I want to make sure that I'm writing something original, but I read a reasonable amount. I read all like women's fiction Australian authors, and I read a lot of contemporary US romance or UK romance. I read crime. I love reading crime because when I'm reading crime, I'm not thinking as much as I am when I'm reading my genres. I'm sort of just enjoying the book and going with the flow, and not analysing everything, not thinking, oh my gosh, it's so much better than me. How can I ever, you know, why am I even trying? So I like reading crime for that reason. I read pretty much everything except sci-fi and fantasy, although I did buy my first fantasy book recently, but I haven't read it yet. Jan said you get royalties from Library Ebooks as well. At this stage, no, unfortunately. We don't get royalties from audio in ebook or audio in library or ebooks in library, but the Australian Society of Authors is working with the government to try and rectify that, which is especially important now because over COVID and lockdowns across the state, so many people started reading or borrowing ebooks and listening to audio rather than actually, so much the print. So yeah, thank you for that question. Kirsty said you mentioned releasing 2 books a year, and I know you released 4 in 2020-21. So I was hoping you could give us a bit of an idea about ones that might have been missed by us during this long COVID period. What a great question. Sure. So last year I released, I'm just going to try and, this is the problem with Zoom. I'm wearing tracky pants, last year I released, I've got my flying top on because this is my top. It's got aeroplanes on that I bought for Outback Secrets, but just got tracky pants on. So anyway, last year I released, right at the beginning of COVID lockdown across Australia, Something to Talk About, which is a rural romance set in a farm, a dairy farming community. It is a sort of enemies to lovers story, and it's a teacher story. A lot of people have been saying to me, you should write a teacher, because so many times nurses and teachers come to town and end up falling for a farmer, but kind of not a twist exactly, but a lot of the times it's female teachers and nurses coming and falling for a male farmer. And I've just got the 5-minute signal, so wrap this up quickly. I wrote a male teacher coming to town, and that was a lot of fun. Flying the Nest also came out last year, which I say this is kind of the book that sits between my 2 genres the most. So it's got a lot of rural romance in it in some ways, but it's actually a women's fiction. It's hard to explain. The heroine lives half in one town called Ragged Point and half in Perth. So you get the best of both worlds. And I wrote the book of my heart in many ways, How to Mend a Broken Heart, which is set mostly in New Orleans, which is a place that I'm absolutely in love with. This came out at the beginning of the year. So when you can't travel overseas, you can do it through books. Hopefully I said that quick enough because we are, getting time. We couldn't see the pants. That's good. Digital loans have a big increase over COVID. Yeah, that's really interesting. And Mariana read this during last year's COVID. Awesome. And Megan's read them all. Thank you. Well, I think I'm probably having to wrap up now. I hope this has been interesting for you guys. It's really hard kind of to talk to people and not be able to see anyone because I can't see reactions or anything like that. So I hope you've enjoyed it and that I haven't been all over the place. But thank you so much for listening and for having me, Wyndham Library.
Thank you so much. It's been such an interesting talk, and we're really grateful that you were able to come and meet with all of us, because it may not have happened if we didn't have COVID, and
True.
We're doing things online. So thank you very much for coming, and everyone else in the chat is saying thank you as well. So thanks everyone for coming along. We've got more events coming up. Rachael mentioned Monica McInerney early on in the piece, and we've got a talk with her coming up next week, I believe. So the link to that's in the chat. You can borrow all of Rachel's books from the library, or order them in from the bookstore. We've got all the links in the chat. Thank you very much, and have a good night.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.